Good evening, everyone. My students will know me. I'm Alexandra Shakespeare. I'm Senior Lecturer in Publishing here at Oxford Brookes University. We're delighted to welcome you here this evening for our inaugural open lecture to mark the beginning of our Making is Thinking, Thinking is Making initiative at the university. The lecture kicks off a series of events under that theme, actually, which take place in the Faculty of Technology, Design and Environment this year and next. They will highlight making in its widest sense and how that creates a compelling narrative around our teaching and research. So that's the idea of the Thinking is Making. Tonight I'm in conversation, of course, with editor Farrah Storr, and we'll be talking about everything that I've learned about journalism, or you've learned about journalism, that your college probably won't tell you. Sorry. Or perhaps. Or a few things we might have done. Okay, we'll see. But before I tell you a little bit more about that, I just need to do the housekeeping notes, and I've got a little crib sheet here about that. Fire drills, we're not expecting one, but if there is a fire alarm, run to your nearest exit here and at the back. And I think we meet in Headington Road. There's a meeting point in Headington Road. So if you haven't already done so, please can you turn your phones to silent? And just to let you know, our talk will be about 45 minutes and about 15 minutes at the end for you to ask questions. We've got a microphone, and Emma has that over there at the front for when we're asking the questions. So if you've got something at the end and during those 15 minutes, just raise your hand and we'll wander around and give you that. It's going to be recorded for online viewing as well, just so everybody knows. Right, so now, a little bit about our speaker this evening. Farrah, you're the Editor-in-Chief of British ELLE. You know that, now do you. Before that, you spent 4 years at Cosmopolitan as editor there. During that time, you were one Editor of the Year, I believe, from the British Society of Magazine Editors. Just going to wait till I get something wrong here. Yeah. You were the launch editor of Women's Health, which I'm told is the most successful women's magazine launch of the millennium. That's quite a nice attribute. In 2017, you were voted one of the most powerful UK BAME leaders by The Guardian and Operation Black Vote. You're also an author. Farrah's an author of The Discomfort Zone, How to Get What You Want by Living Fearlessly, and that was published last year. So a bit about you as a person. Farrah, you're of mixed race heritage. Your father emigrated to the UK from Pakistan, and you grew up in Salford, I believe? Yeah. Okay, so it seems that while Farrah had no necessarily frames of reference during her childhood for journalism, you said to get your drive from your father. He's the one that kind of drove you. So we know you as an editor for championing inclusivity. As editor of Cosmopolitan, one of the most high-profile decisions that we believe Farrah made was to put plus-size model Tess Holliday on the cover, which sparked a national debate. Certainly got Piers Morgan going, didn't it? We can talk about that. Farrah is also on our Journalism Advisory Board as part of our degree programme in Media, Journalism and Publishing. Many of you are here. One of the students on that are here tonight. I believe you're also part of the Government's Social Mobility Commission. Yeah. There's a lot to say because you've done a lot.
I know it sounds terrible. I just don't sound like a real person, do I? I sound really boring and earnest.
Well, let's get on to some of the fun stuff. But just to recap on what we'll be talking about tonight, Farrah will be sharing the things that she has learned in her career and how she got where she is today as Editor-in-Chief of ELLE. Might be exploding a few myths along the way, focusing on 4 key themes. How moving jobs every 18 months taught her to be a better leader. How social media is the secret to great journalism. Why there's no such thing as magazine brand voice. And why great covers are not about the celebrity on the cover. So we're delighted to have Farrah here this evening to discuss everything that she's learned about journalism. So everyone, please join me in a warm welcome for Farrah Storr. It's nice and long, isn't it?
I did wonder how you were going to get 3 minutes out of that, but I see why now. Okay.
Well, there's some ground to cover. I mean, let's talk about the first area that you you brought up, which was how moving jobs every 18 months taught you to be a better leader. Now, can you tell us, I mean, we went through some of your biog there, but can you tell us a little bit about your career climb? Did you have a plan, or did this...
I'm going to move back because I can't see everyone because I'm on a tilt. No, I didn't have a career plan, actually. My only plan was I had to earn more money. So I went to university in London. I applied to Oxford, didn't get in. It was, mortified. And I suppose after that, because it's always what I'd wanted in my life, I'd been working towards it most of my life. And of course, when you get the rejection letter around Christmas, you're like, oh my God. And so after that, I made a really strategic decision. I knew I probably wanted to go into journalism. And I remember my sister, who had been a lawyer, she won a magazine competition. The long and short of it is she then got a job in a magazine. She said to me, look, you're going to have to do a substantial amount of work experience. And I wasn't, I knew that I couldn't afford to come down to London and do lots of work experience. So what I thought was the best thing was I'll go to university in London, and actually I'll use that strategically to do my studies, but actually the real goal was for me to do work experience for kind of 4 years. And so by the time I graduated, I'd have a good chance of getting a job. I got a job. I was fairly late. I was 24 and I got my first job. I was features assistant at Woman and Home. And it wasn't a bad salary. It was about 17 grand. And I knew I just had to, I knew that, look, you don't go into journalism for the money. And so what I thought was, well, if I've got to earn, I remember I had this thing about 25k, I had to get to 25k, and actually to get there, I had to take on 4 different jobs to get there. So, and it was, of course, it was very bad, people always used to say to me, don't change jobs, it looks really bad, it looks terrible on your CV. But I was motivated by necessity, really, which is I've just got to live. And of course, a consequence of that was, now that I'm a leader, is that I think some people, I know lots of people, lots of colleagues of mine have only worked for kind of 1 or 2 bosses in their lives. And so I think what I got to see numerous bosses, because I had lots of jobs. I think the longest time I've stayed in a job was Cosmo, which was just under 4 years. But I got to see what really good leadership looked like, and I got to see what really crappy leadership looked like. And I suppose by the time you got to be an editor, you just had a really good template of kind of what I thought worked and what I knew didn't work. So that wasn't the design, but actually it ended up, now that I'm an editor, being really helpful, I think.
And so what did you take away from those 4 different editors, good and bad?
It was way more than 4 editors. I mean, there are about 10, 12 different editors. I mean, I've had lots of jobs. Do you know what? One of the things I remember, there's this thing, me and Alex were talking about on magazines where they have a beauty sale. And essentially the beauty department gets sent all these products and they have to test them, and then once every few months they sell them. So they put them in a room and the money goes to charity, and the staff and team get to go and buy them, and they buy them fairly cheap price. But the idea is to give money to charity. However, the long and short of it is, so everybody kind of goes in together and they've got their bags and they're ready to buy these beauty products. And one boss that I had, what she used to do was, and we knew she was the editor-in-chief, she got paid more than anyone else. She would go in before everyone, and you could see through these glass doors she was picking off all the Jo Malone, all the Estee Lauder, basically everything that the juniors had kind of were desperate to have. And then she would leave with all these bags, and then you would go in, there'd be nothing left. And I suppose one of those things, it was just like, it's that whole thing of, I think there's a book like, Leaders Eat Last, it's that you can't be doing that, it's a really bad sign and signal to your team. It's like, you shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. So that was one thing that I learned, so I'd never go to beauty sales at all now. And I suppose some of my best leaders were the ones that, it sounds a cliche, but the ones who basically said to me, I don't have the answers, I don't know, I'm trying really hard. I think I've never really trusted leaders who go, right, this is the plan, because nobody has a plan. We're all kind of make it up as we go along, and smart people look at what they've got in front of them at the time, and brilliant leaders go, okay, this is what we're dealing with, I want you to trust me, but I don't have the exact answer. And so the best leaders that I had were those who were very emotionally honest, I think. So lots of different things, I think. And I think the other good thing is I had a lot of leaders who were naturally very introverted people. They made exceptional leaders. They didn't necessarily like doing talks, standing in front of the team. They'd always be behind, but they worked harder than anyone else. They worked as hard and as late as what they asked of their people. So I think this idea of when I came to journalism, I thought I had an idea of what an editor looked like, and, you know, we all think it should look like Anna Wintour, and of course Anna Wintour is the way she is because that is her personality type. I imagine she's fairly shy, she's not particularly chatty, but I think that became a template for how you needed to be, and it's not been my experience that, you know, having seen lots of diverse forms of leadership, there isn't one way that works, actually.
And what was your last role before you took an editorship, and how did you make that transition from going into your first editorship?
So I think the other thing about moving jobs every few years was that I've also done pretty much every job on the magazine. And it's good because you know what the stresses and strains of your junior writer, your deputy features editor. So I came up through the writing thing. I lived in Australia for a short amount of time, and it's very different in Australia. Editors go up; they come through beauty. So if you're a beauty editor, you usually end up being an editor because you deal with clients a lot, so you're good on the money side. But in the UK, it's always been you come up through the writer side. And so I was in Australia, I was an associate editor, which is a kind of a non-title, but means you're kind of like a glorified features editor. You commission, you look after all the words. And then I moved back to England from Australia, and I got a job on a magazine called Top Santé. It was a wellness magazine. It was not anything I was particularly interested in at the time, but I needed to earn money, and I was doing that job, and then I got a phone call of somebody saying, look, there's this new launch happening, it's called Women's Health, we're looking for an editor, and I knew editorships don't come up very often because people tend to stay in them, and I applied and I got the job miraculously within a few hours because, of course, what I found out consequently was they had an editor. And because it was no money, no staff, it was very difficult, this project. The editor had walked out. And so they needed somebody to basically come in and kind of rescue the project, I suppose. And so I took it. And that's kind of where the book came from, is a very difficult situation. But if it hadn't have been a difficult editorship, I don't think we would have been the success we were. It made us think very differently about things.
Yeah, so it was the challenging situation that you were in, and obviously, as you mentioned, your book, The Discomfort Zone, I mean, that must have been a key sort of moment in your career where that you experienced discomfort in that sense and turned it to your advantage.
Yeah,
How did you manage that?
Well, you know, we didn't know actually it was advantageous at the time. All we knew was we were told, look, we'll give you this editorship. We need you to sell 100,000 copies from issue 1. 100,000 copies is a lot of copies. And if we don't sell it from issue 1, you know, Reading the Ruins, it probably wouldn't launch. I had 2 members of staff, and we had pretty much no budget. So actually, I ended up writing most of the magazine and kind of changing the bylines. But because we didn't have any budget, we ended up being really creative. So like an example, I remember we did a feature on, I think it was on breast health. And we couldn't afford any pictures to go with this feature, because the pictures of, you know, you put breasts into Getty and you imagine what you get like page 3 type things, or you get these beautiful fashion images, which we didn't have the money. And I remember we had this hole in our kind of flat plan, so the magazine laid out, and it was like a week it was getting very close towards deadline, and we still didn't have an image to, you know, to illustrate this feature on breast health. It makes it sound really boring. It was actually a very good feature. And we were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I remember the 3 of us, me, my picture editor, and my art director, and we had an intern at the time. We were all in this tiny airless office, and the intern that day had come in a skirt, and she never usually wore skirts. And we were all stood up talking, and we looked down at Amelia, and Amelia, when we looked down at her, my art director said, look at her knees. And so when you looked at her knees from above, they looked like a giant pair of breasts. And then she had on like these I think it was her that she had like these nude shoes on, and she realised that actually if you did that, they looked like nipples. So it was, and so we were like, right, we've got an idea. And of course, what it did was, you know, we blew it up, we had it huge. And when the magazine launched, it was what everybody talked about. They were like, oh my God, this magazine, it's not like any health magazines we've seen. It's mischievous, it's naughty. And we did these weird things with imagery. And that became kind of a template for us. But the point is, years, I would never have come up with that, or we would never have come up with it if those huge constraints of time, of money, weren't there. So they make you think very differently about things.
So challenge makes you creative,
It makes you really creative, yeah.
I mean, going into Cosmopolitan as the editor-in-chief at a time when it was at sales were at an all-time low must have been a really big move, and one that you probably, well, one hand it's Cosmopolitan, amazing. The other hand, you've got a real challenge. We can talk about, you increased, I think, circulation by an unprecedented 59% in the first year. There's lots of stats about how successful you were there, but going in at that point, what was that like for you?
Well, I think I've always had this thing, I should never say this, but I've always had this thing about you shouldn't ever be at kind of at the top for more than 4 years, because I don't know, it's like politics, isn't it? 4 years, and I think in the Ape Kingdom after 4 years you get toppled, and I've always thought that if you're working flat out, by after about 4 years you are spent, your ideas are kind of, so you move on to the next thing. And I had been at Women's Health for almost 4 years, and I remember saying to my husband, for the first time actually at Women's Health, it feels really comfortable now, like, it just feels easy, not easy, but, well, it was quite easy. And then the Cosmo job came along. And at first I was resistant, because actually I'd founded Women's Health, I was very emotionally attached to it, very emotionally attached to the team. But actually I didn't feel that actually there was a whole lot more that I could do with it. I'd kind of given everything. And Cosmo, it was a big brand, yes, and it was also, I knew that I could perform well under challenge. And I knew it was, Cosmo essentially was like 6 months to turn it around. You need to get it back to #1 within 6 months. And I knew it would be difficult, because whereas Women's Health we could kind of fail very privately because nobody knew much about it, at Cosmo there was a lot of expectation. It's like, what's this person going to do? She's only edited a health magazine. People said to me, there is a formula that works for Cosmo and don't change it. And of course my feeling was, when I looked at Cosmo, it felt very dated. I didn't think things like male naked centerfolds were the right thing at a time when women didn't want to be objectified. I couldn't understand why we were doing it to blokes. The agony ants, it just didn't feel, it just all felt very old. So I went in. The other thing about Cosmo was the editor that I replaced, she actually got promoted up in the company, was somebody I really looked up to and the team loved. And so it was difficult. Yeah, it was difficult, because you have to go in there, they'd all been there a long time, and you basically have to say, look, we're going to change it. And it doesn't mean everything that you've done is wrong, but it does mean it does need to kind of move forward. And I remember saying to them all, it's going to feel really tough, but actually, when it feels tough, you have to understand that feelings of toughness actually are the right feelings. If it feels easy, I'd be really worried. But actually, if you feel like, God, this is really challenging me, and if you go home at night and think, God, I've worked really hard today, that's actually quite a nice feeling, and not a lot of people get that in their life. And rightly or wrongly, because they're a really good team, most of them decided to resign very quickly. And so, ironically, I was left with kind of a tiny team yet again to kind of rethink this magazine. And the same thing, it meant that we didn't have a lot of time. Because I didn't have a big team, I didn't canvass opinion and go, what do you think? Because sometimes when you have massive meetings and you ask everyone's opinion, personally, a brilliant idea can get watered down, and by the time it comes back around, you've not made a decision. And so we did things like, we got rid of the naked centerfolds, we got rid of all the things that had made Cosmo famous. And I think if we'd have had the massive team and the luxury of time, we probably wouldn't have done it. We would have gone, oh, actually, maybe. So, again, it ended up being a really positive thing in the end. But it was very hard.
At what point did you think these things, the centerfold, the sextits, when did you think this has got to go? I mean, you said you noted it was dated. Was that part of your pitch as taking on the editorship? Or was that something that when you arrived?
Not really, because actually the job, my CEO at the time, this brilliant woman, she said to me, look, are you interested? And look, there were, she obviously interviewed me, but I remember she said to me, I trust you that you know what women want. And I thought, oh my God. And she went, no, honestly, I trust you. She said, what I'm going to do, she went, and this is great leadership again. She said, I'm going to leave you alone, and I'm going to protect you from all the voices who are going to tell you that you perhaps are not doing the right thing. She said, because I trust that you know what young women want. And she said, and just do it. And it was the best thing she could have ever said, because I knew she had my back, and she did really have my back. As my CEO now, exactly the same. They let me do my thing. but they shield you. And I knew straight away, like on day one, do you know what I mean? I think the problem is most people know when something is wrong. The problem is most people don't have the balls to go, this is wrong, because they, we all look for approval. And but I've never been afraid of being unpopular, I suppose.
Did you doubt yourself at that point? The team had gone, you were getting rid of everything it was known for, the magazine itself.
Yeah,
Did you think, God, am I going in the right... I mean, to trust yourself and your CEO to trust you...
Yeah, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, because every time someone would come into my door, I'd be like, you're resigning. And they're like, yeah. And it was terrible, because you feel... well, you're not there to be friends, but the best you can hope is that people get on with you and they respect you. And obviously, I felt like this team had no faith in me. They didn't respect me. They didn't like what I was doing. It was very hard, because actually even people, you take everything personally, even if you try not to. But I also understood their pain, and I understood why resigning may have been the right thing for them. So, it was very difficult.
And they must have been worried and concerned about the future. They're seeing a completely different Cosmo emerging with a completely different editor.
That's it.
And change can be scary.
Yeah, and
so what did they need from you?
Well, the people that remained. It's similar. I mean, I think a lot of them, I said to them, I remember the beauty director there, I said, look, what do you want to do? What do you think is not present in the beauty world? And then she had this big thing that she'd obviously been holding in for years. It goes back to brand voice. Because the brand had always gone, do 10 ways with a moisturiser. I'm being facetious. We didn't do things like that, but it's like 10 things to do with a moisturiser. And I said to her, what do you think the world should know about beauty? And she was like, well, the beauty world is really interesting. This was like about 8 years ago, and she was like, people are doing things to their faces. Why are they doing it? And she was interested in the culture, and beauty was just kind of the end result of what was going on in culture. And I said, well, we should write about that. You should make beauty as beauty should be investigative journalism in the same way that writing is. There should be no different. And she went ahead. She did it. She won she's won all the awards, but she knew. So I think often, again, it goes down to, you think that the leader has all the answers. Well, you don't have the answers. Actually, usually the people that work for you have the answers, but what they need for you is to coax it out of them. And also to say to them, if you balls it up, it doesn't actually matter, honestly. It's just a magazine.
And you took all those lessons with you to ELLE. It's a very different magazine, very different team, I imagine. It sounds like you brought some substance to the style at Cosmo, and are you doing the same at ELLE?
Well, no one's resigned. Actually, 2 people have resigned, but for different reasons. It's very different because it's fashion, and it didn't need a revamp in the way that Cosmo did. It possibly needed tinkering with. The big challenge for me is that I'm over the magazine, but also digital, so it's bringing the two together. And I think when you get an editor on a magazine, what you are employed for, this is the reality, is you are employed for you. So I think my thing with ELLE is bringing me to ELLE. And I said to the team, because I think when I went in originally, and they're probably still waiting for it, they're like, what's the plan, what's the vision? And I was like, I don't know. I said, to be honest, I don't know. And I said, and actually, if I knew the vision, those people that go, here's the vision, I used to think there's comfort in that when you have a leader who goes, this is the vision, this is the plan. But then if you don't know the terrain that you're working in, how do you know the plan is going to work for that terrain? So ELLE, there isn't any wood here, there's wood on the floor. Touch wood is doing really well. And again, we've increased sales. But you're not going to see ELLE how I envisage it for about another few months, because it takes about 6 months for you to start to, and now I have the plan of what it needs to be. But I don't, I think there's people that come in and go, this is the plan, this is the action. Or people that do that and then they admit, I got it wrong, it probably wasn't quite right. Those make, I think, admirable leaders.
I mean, it's a challenging market. What does it need to be at ELLE?
Well, I think it needs to be, the only thing that we've really changed, and as I said, we've seen significant growth almost immediately, is we've put things to read in there. I mean, fashion, like beauty, is an amazing landscape. It's not about dresses. Fashion is about culture. There are fascinating characters in fashion. We do profiles on them. We dig deeper. We have a piece at the moment, as it was in the next issue, about this chap called Derek Blasberg, who you probably won't know his name, but if you look on every single picture, on every front row, or at every supermodel party, he's there. He's like, where's Wally? And so I was like, who is this guy? How did he become so powerful? And so that's pretty much what we've done. We've made the beauty longer. We've made it investigative. Not in the way that Cosmo was, because it is different. We did a feature in ELLE when I first joined about why women were having work all taken out of their faces. They wanted to look older. They wanted to look like individuals. And it did really well in print, but it flew digitally. So I think ELLE has always been about fashion, but it's also been about originality. And I think the other thing at ELLE that we did, and I was very adamant about this when I first came in, is to have diverse opinions in the magazine. I think when I first came in, we had a really interesting feature that we ran, which was about a woman talking about she'd wanted to be sample size her whole life in her 20s, and she had, she was very unhealthy in her pursuit of being sample size, and it never happened. She could never get there. She's now in her 40s and, going through a very bad breakup, and a result of that is she's now sample size, or was sample size. And I was like, well, this is worth investigating. There's something really interesting here. And actually her conclusion, of course, is that she had to get to that place she thought was, success, to realise it absolutely wasn't. And it was interesting. So she wrote this piece, and it was my first week at ELLE, and somebody in the team put their hand up and they said, can I say something deeply unpopular? And I was like, please. And I like unpopular people. I like people that rock the boat. And she went, I'm not sure this is a safe feature to be putting out there. Me and the team have been talking about this for days. And I said, look, it's, first of all, I totally admire you for putting yourself out there and telling me. I said, but the fact that you've been talking about this for days is a very good sign that there is something to be talking about here. And as long, of course, as it was not a dangerous piece, it was, I think what some of the team thought was you can only talk about body positivity. And of course, that's not the reality. It's wonderful to tell people, love yourself, be happy with who you are. The reality is not everybody is. Most people are not. And so if you create a magazine which is just aping culture, which is love yourself, self-care, you're not speaking a universal truth. And so in ELLE, there are some features perhaps I put in there which you turn the page and you might be a bit surprised at what they are. But that's absolutely right. You should be surprised, and it should make you think about things. So it's not rocket science, but it is in a media landscape, I find at the moment, where everybody is virtue signalling and they want to say the thing because they're scared about reprisals on Twitter and social media. If you go down that path, you're going to end up with a very bland product, and also you're not going to... journalism is about rattling things. It's about looking at the culture and going, but have you thought about this?
Yeah.
Without judgment, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very long monologue, sorry. So I think that's what we've done. I think that's why it's working.
So, we've seen a reflection of that in the market, I guess, globally as well. Magazines like Teen Vogue, which have become really woke and covering off key social issues. How does ELLE tackle the difficult issues in a woman's life?
But it's folded, right? It's only digital now. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's that, I always say to the team, you actually should be political. You should be socially political. When I was at Cosmo, we never used the word feminist ever. Not because we weren't all deeply feminist, of course. But the minute you started using certain words, sometimes your reader sees it and they just switch off. They're just like, oh, it's going to be a lecture. And the most incredible thing you can do as a journalist is to make them engage with the story. So how do we cover the issues? Well... the piece Rosie did, that's a piece really about not body positivity, it's a piece about bodies. I do a lot of first-person stuff. I'm a massive fan of people writing about their own experience because actually everything boils down to, I think I talked to you about this, it's not about the group, it's about an individual's experience. So we tell it through someone's experience. We did a piece, a very popular piece, a couple of issues ago, and then it went online about a woman who... essentially became a workaholic, and she got to the top and she realised, success is this desolate attic and it's not what you want. And she chose to walk away. She's like, I don't want to be ambitious. It's not what I want. And again, you could argue, well, that's not good messaging for a woman. But then I would argue it is a different sort of messaging, which is it's totally your choice to walk away from this if you want. So we don't, we're not dogmatic, because I don't think, who wants to go for a drink with people who just talk about politics but shout at you? Nobody. What you want is people who go, totally hear where you're coming from, or I don't, but I'm prepared to listen to see where you're coming from. And that's what good magazines should be. And that's why I think brand voices where it's all the same and everyone's in agreement, I'm not sure that's the right thing, actually.
You said you like people who rock the boat.
Yeah.
How have you rocked the boat in your career?
Well, I don't think I actually mean to. I was saying to my husband the other day, I said, I get really sick of people going, oh, controversial editor. I said, I'm not controversial. I said, all I am is, it goes back to, and my old team on Cosmo, they were saying to me the other day, they went, people say we write controversial stuff. They're like, we're not controversial. And I said, no, you're not controversial. But what you do is, and this is good journalism, you look at what the world is talking about, and then you go, how about we start talking about this now? So we were going to do something at ELLE, we haven't done it yet, but about toxic femininity. The world is talking about toxic masculinity, so I was like, okay, what's the thing the world isn't talking about? That actually this can exist within women too. Totally valid. You would see that as controversial. Of course, it's not controversial, it's just offering a different view. So when I say they rock the boat, I think they're just people who are prepared to put themselves on the line, to offer a different viewpoint. And often what comes with that is, it's why I've always liked writers who, whenever they write something, I go, you are going to get reprisals on Twitter. I said, but you have to... you actually have to leave the trolls, you don't interact with them, and what happens is people will start talking on your behalf. And so with Tess Holliday, what happened is I got some terrible things said about me, but actually trolls I've always found are just people who they just want a space in which to talk. And then other people will start intervening, and then hopefully what you should end up with is a conversation, which is what journalism should kind of be.
Yeah, so I mean, sitting back and letting the trolls talk, that's quite a difficult strategy at times. How do those I mean, I know on your team, maybe they're worried about being controversial, maybe they're fed up of being trolled or followed on various social media. How do they develop a thick skin? How do you sit back and just ignore or...
Well, I'm very honest with them to begin with. When I interview people, I do go, look, this is the sort of journalism that I'm interested in. If you're interested in making some noise, I said, this is what will happen. And I said, I'm not saying it's right. And that is the really hard thing for journalism, the journalist, because, it's one of those jobs. No other job, although it is changing with things like Glassdoor, but no other job do people get to make comments on your accounting. But journalists write something, and the comment is free, and people attack you. So it's made the profession very difficult. But what it has done is, in the profession, it has meant that the people who are really driven by passion, not by what they perceive as the perks, or not by what they perceive as status of having a byline, but people who really believe in writing about something, it's kind of weeded those people out. And so I'm just very honest with them. And the other thing, of course, is, I barely use my Twitter account. I just let it ride itself out. So it's amazing how easy you can get used to it. I mean, it's just a lot of white noise, really.
And navigating a landscape, particularly Twitter, that's rife with fake news and propaganda. I guess, how do young journalists navigate that? How do they navigate their personal brands on social media, do you think, as young writers or young journalists starting out?
Well, it depends, doesn't it? Because everyone's like, you have to have a personal brand. And actually, I would say, if you are a journalist, the only personal brand you need to have is you need to have a voice. Your voice and your byline, so, is your byline Alex or Alexandra?
Alexandra.
Right, so you decide on what the name is that you're going to use, and you discover what your voice is. That's the only personal branding you need. And I think, we've been through a whole wave of people going, you need to have a personal brand. To be a journalist, actually, being an influencer is different to a journalist. The only personal branding journalists need is a strong voice and a not even a good byline. I mean, I was called Farrah Butt before I was married. It was a terrible byline. But you need a strong voice. And so how do you show that on social media? Well, that's where Twitter is quite good, because actually you can put your work out there. You can I often judge people by how they write their comments, actually. You can tell, is this a smart person? Have they got an interesting view on the world? Instagram is less useful if you're a journalist, I think. That really is about, brand me. LinkedIn is really good because obviously you can post, you can put up there, but it's only useful if you're saying something different. And that's where you have to decide, am I brave enough to do that? And if you are brave enough to do it, what will happen is you will get noticed. Yeah. That's the reality. Doesn't mean you have to be controversial, but it does mean you have to. If the world is talking about this, your thing is never going to stand out. So you need to talk about something else, the opposite side.
So, and you've said that you think social media is the secret to great journalism. I know you're an advocate of the long form as well. So how does that play out, that idea? So I suppose social media is a blessing in that for ideas. So in my day, if you wanted to come up with a feature idea, you had to ask your friends, and if you noticed a trend, that was probably a good feature idea. Or you looked in newspapers, but of course, what social media has done, and actually at Cosmo, the majority of our feature ideas came from Instagram, and they came from that Explore page, because of course on the Explore page you start to notice things. One of our best features we did, and it went everywhere. I think it became a BBC 3 documentary. Pretty sure this one did, or maybe it didn't, I don't know. But it travelled really far and wide. It was about the escorts of Instagram and all these young women who had got into prostitution. They called it entrepreneurial escorting. And it came about because I remember being on Instagram and seeing all these young women who were Cosmo readers' ages, and they all had they were all in similar situations. So they were all in Abu Dhabi or they were all in Dubai. They all had these expensive handbags, and they'd done like these shopping trawls. They'd all had, and nothing wrong with this, by the way, they'd all had like their lips done. They'd obviously had quite a lot of surgery. I remember thinking, I keep seeing this. How are they affording? Something doesn't stack up. And so when you feel like that, I said to one of my team, can somebody just go and look into this? And sure enough, one of my team came back and said, if you put #courtesan into Instagram, a whole other world comes up. I mean, we raised a really important thing for Instagram through that, and there was this thing. It was, it had become a shop window for this, for sex, really. But we would never have known that had it not been for Instagram. So you start to, what you see is you see patterns of behaviour, and once you see the patterns, then the journalist's job is to start doing your due diligence and properly investigate it and find the case studies and talk to them and then make it into a story which is without judgment. So broadening sort of a magazine brand and the voice to include authentic experiences, and sort of moving away from this idea that there's a Cosmo girl or there's an ELLE girl, or the sort of brand around them. Have you broken away from that? I mean, you talked about some of the writers. Is diversity? I mean, obviously diversity is really important to you. Is that how are you driving that at ELLE now?
Well, I think it's. First of all, when people talk about diversity, they presume they always think it's race, and actually, of course, diversity is absolutely everything. And for journalism, the most important thing is you never see this person, but it's diversity of thought. That's the thing. Have they got a different experience? Are they offering a different view on the world? So that's the diversity that I am interested in. So at ELLE, for example, we did a big piece in the front of the book, and it was we have a piece at the front called Memoir, and it's kind of where we put our amazing writers. And this woman was talking about growing up. She came from a very, very working class background. And that wasn't central to the piece. The piece was about her relationship with her mother. But actually, when I think back to glossy magazines, whenever people are writing about themselves, very rarely do you notice people talking about a working class background, because, I don't know, maybe it's not seen as aspirational or whatever. And so things like that we're starting to put in more, and that comes from actually choosing writers who perhaps don't live in London, who are regional, who are outside, I'm very keen on people who are not necessarily university educated. It gives them a different slant on the world. The only thing I asked for at ELLE, our brand values basically, and this was the magazine when it was born, the thing that knits everything together in ELLE is originality. So if Vogue is about style, ELLE was always about style with a twist. It was always about being original. So ELLE was the first place where, you saw like heels worn with like an ankle sock. And they were always big on that on the style side, but I've said to my team, actually, originality is essentially diversity. It's essentially diversity of experience and representation within the stories we tell. So it's very nuanced. We don't make a big thing of it. I mean, I've said to the team, I said, I'm not a fan of, when you're starting something by labeling someone. I said, actually, the best thing you can do, and I say this as somebody who is mixed-raced, and I don't mind this, but in the last few years, every time people talk about me, it's as a mixed-race woman, and I was like, that's totally fine, I'm very happy with that. I was like, but there is so much more, and actually to start with that as a label, I said it obscures so many different things. So I try not to just label people. I hope the diversity comes through the stories they tell. You read them, you turn a page, which is why you can't have a brand voice. You turn a page and you go, this person's voice is totally valid and it's so different to mine, and I didn't think I'd be exposed to that in ELLE. So it's a very, very nuanced approach to it.
And how do you tie in your work with the Social Mobility Commission with your work as an editor? How do the two work together? I mean, clearly you have a platform.
Yeah. It's really hard because obviously one of the reasons why I wanted to join the Commission was, I don't know if everyone knows what social mobility is, but, moving from class to class, I wanted to join because publishing, of course, is one of the, it's a difficult industry to get ahead in, or to get a start in rather than ahead. Once you're in, it's actually okay. But actually, because we're based in London, you could be a really smart kid living in Sunderland, but unless you have the means to get down to London, to afford the rent, to be able to do the work experience, it's a non-starter. And so I really wanted to, and that is one of the things that Hurst are really looking at, is actually how do you give access to this world to people, because and that is the problem, is because the necessity of being in London, the work experience, you're attracting the same sort of people, and these are good people, but they have similar backgrounds. And so my big thing is how do I get people from different backgrounds involved? And that might not mean they have to move down to London. I mean, one of the things that I really want to look at is, a much bigger network system. I mean, one of the things we're about to do at Hurst is have an open commissioning system. So what that means is if you wanted to write for Cosmo, let's say, the networks close in again. So you might go, I want to write for Cosmo. Well, that's difficult because it's not enough to have a good idea. You have to know somebody on the brand, and that person on the brand has to reply to your email. And so the networks, they build up, and you're just like, this is just too difficult. So one of the things that we're doing is every single brand at Hurst, we're asking them to put a very, very detailed template together. So if you want to write for Inside Soap or you want to write for Esquire, this is exactly how you have to pitch it. And of course that weeds out lots of people that go, do you want to feature on milk? Which I actually got recently. But what it does is, what we're saying is, we will commit to a senior editor, we'll read these, we'll see them, you will get some sort of feedback. And what that means is you don't have to move down to London to have a voice in our brands. And I think it's the best. It would be idealistic of me to say, although Channel 4 has done it, let's just move out of the country. If you're a writer, you can operate from anywhere, or a photographer. So, yeah. And I think the other thing is, I hesitate to say this, but I think university education is brilliant, but you don't always, just because you don't have it, don't think that this world isn't for you. And I think that's kind of messaging which gets lost a lot as well.
So breaking down networks, opening them up, broadening the remit, broadening media as a whole, kind of is really going to be part of your legacy. Is that how you would like to be viewed?
I hope so, yeah, I hope so. I think it is. I think it's opening up the networks a bit more. I think, it's why I'm really keen on competitions, and I always say to people, apply for the competitions. My husband didn't go to university, barely has an education, became a very successful journalist. He won a competition in a magazine. It was like, do you have a fanzine? Enter. My sister, she was a lawyer, but she entered a competition to write for More magazine. She got a job. So I'm very keen on competitions. Enter them, because you'll be surprised at the number of people who don't. I think my legacy, it's not a legacy, hopefully I've got a few more years to go, but it's kind of dismantling the networks a little bit. I'm also saying to people, your voice is your most precious thing you have. And actually, your voice is valid. Don't be swayed by the fact that you have to be. I think those brand voices, what they do is they make people go, so you have to be a certain type of person. And the truth is, if you're creating good magazine brands, the values of your brand should be the same, but the voices should all be completely divergent.
I think that's a good point to give some voices to our audience, really, and ask them to perhaps ask a few questions here, add to what we've already talked about. I think Emma's got a microphone, and just put your hand up if you've got a question. Over at the back there.
Hi. So you talk about the importance of like social media and things in terms of this kind of world, but I was just wondering how important is that personal social media? So if you wanted to write for a magazine and you just weren't into the whole social media scene, like, does it matter so much? Is it important for each individual contributor to a magazine in any capacity to have a big social media presence on a personal basis, or is it okay for someone to kind of just distance themselves from that and kind of just focus more on the voice they have within the magazine rather than the voice they have in the magazine and their social media presence as well?
I mean, I personally think the coolest thing is to have no social media presence, because actually, first of all, I mean, you know, what a luxury. And actually, if you are a journalist, you know, you have to be impartial, remember. Actually, you kind of need to be a ghost in some way, which is you go in, you report. Your identity comes through your voice. But actually, I don't want to know about your life. I don't want to know what you had for breakfast. I have to do it because it's part of my job. But I don't think it matters at all. The only time it might matter a little bit is if you are writing for digital. And say you have a huge social media following, well, that's going to work in your favour because you can share it far and wide. But it's not going to get you the commission. The commission is going to be based on how brilliant is your idea. Does your idea stand out? Has your idea not been read before? And for me, is your idea quite brave? Because if it's brave, then you actually don't even need all these followers. It will travel. It will gain its own momentum and it will travel. So, no, I actually think... And I also think, somebody was saying this the other day as a very big influencer, the Instagram thing, it's starting to trail off a little bit now. You know, people I used to follow who are posting religiously, it's trailing off. So I don't think you need to worry about that at all.
I've got a question. As an academic... No, microphone. I've got a question about... disability, if I may. As a dyslexic person, which sometimes I find quite hard to cope with as an academic, right. Would you ever employ someone as a writer who was dyslexic? And is there any support in Hurst for people with brilliant ideas but whose spelling is sometimes a bit shite?
Well, A.A. Gill, probably the greatest writer, you know, of the last 50 years, was dyslexic. He used to phone up Alex Bilmes, who edits Esquire, and he would, because he spoke so he wrote as he spoke, but he would ring up and he would dictate his copy down. And it comes down to the editor, actually. And I think really good editors, if you are brilliant and you are eloquent, and you have all the things I said to that lady, a brilliant idea, a brilliant voice, you will find, or you should find, somebody who goes, I'm going to work with you because I believe in you. Because he was the biggest journalist of his time. If you haven't read any of his stuff, you should. And you read it, and you cannot believe that he was so dyslexic. But he had an editor who went, I believe in you. I will listen to you, and I will. So I don't think it matters. But it does depend on the editor. It's going to make it harder, because obviously you've got to get in front of them, and they've got to have a feel for you. But you know, good editors take risks on good people.
And nurture ideas.
That's right.
That's what I'm really getting from you, that you guys are in a situation where you nurture ideas.
Yeah, you work with them.
And I think sometimes dyslexic students that I've worked with over the years, sometimes you feel like I'm never going to be able to do that because
right.
I can't, you know, because I get tripped up on spelling on it.
Yeah.
So I think there's such a lovely message about really nurturing and finding the right publication and the right editor.
That's right.
Who's going to do something marvellous with that.
And that's how it works, isn't it? You find an editor in your life and you work with the editor, and the editor takes the writer along, and they are very personal relationships, and yeah, and also I don't know because I'm not dyslexic, but I've always wondered if you are dyslexic whether they often make quite brilliant writers because I don't know, you probably think about things differently, you know, or you interpret things differently, and that is worth its weight in gold if you find the right editor. It's amazing.
Great question, thank you.
Broadening out, so dyslexia and ADHD, and I've got an autistic son who I'm obviously kind of concerned about his future and his prospects and being discriminated against. And I think companies like Hearst and publishers, especially in the creative sector, are becoming much more open to different points of view. And like what you were saying about first-person pieces, if it gives you an insight into something that you wouldn't already have thought about, or something that makes you think completely differently, as a dyslexic person or as somebody with ADHD, that's a good thing because it's opening up a conversation. That's what journalism should be. So I would think that it shouldn't be a stumbling block. I mean, yeah. But from my point of view as a freelancer, which, you know, I don't know if I'm speaking for anybody else here, but I think it's just getting through to the editors and getting through to... and getting your voice heard, which social media, for me as a freelancer, is invaluable.
It's been amazing.
For that. Yeah, and Twitter's brilliant because if you're self-employed, then, you know, you have to big yourself up and get over that kind of embarrassment,
and you can hassle people publicly. That's the thing. That's why social media has been really effective, because you publicly will shame people and go, I've emailed you haven't got back to me. But that's why with the networks thing, it's like at Hearst, it's like we are going to commit to a senior editor. They're not going to give you huge amounts, but they will get back to you. And you will probably know, I was freelance too. There's nothing worse than you do this idea, it just goes into the ether and nobody gets back to you. And so you can't pitch it anywhere else, because if that person wants your idea and then, I don't know, the Daily Mail wants it, then so it's, I guess that's just manners, right?
I think you can tell editors that have been freelance because they have that empathy. And
they understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that you are a jobbing journalist.
And they just, you know what, sometimes a no is brilliant. It's like, great, I can move on.
Yeah.
You know.
Definitely. Anything. Any response is it's a positive thing. So.
Do we have any other questions in the room? Thank you, in the middle row.
Thank you. So you mentioned, obviously, the decline of Teen Vogue in terms of going digital only. But on the contrast, we've also seen the decline of digital-only media brands like The Pool. So I'm interested to know more about how you think magazines and publications today stay relevant, whether that is in the digital space where there's a whole lot of conversation, or in print, the more traditional space, but obviously where some sales are declining.
Well, I think, first of all, everyone goes, oh, print is declining, oh my God. And I've always thought that actually, to just answer your question on the print side, is that actually, this isn't technically true, but sometimes, because people go, it's declining, people give up. And actually what happens is, so like with ELLE, our sales are up quite significantly. It's not rocket science. All we did was we spent longer on giving people really quality stuff that we thought they wanted to read. But I think sometimes you can come into an industry and go, it's on the decline, and then you stop trying. And then and consumers are so sensitive to that, you know. I went to buy some magazines the other day, and you could feel in the pages this poor team behind it had just given up. They just thought, well, print's in decline. And whereas if you have an editor or a team who are like, oh my God, we're going to go for it, consumers, you will see, they will be there. I think digital only, I mean, yeah, exactly, The Pool, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of reasons why that closed, but some things will live on print, some things will live online, some things will do both. ELLE will always be across multiple platforms. Fashion people like prints. They really, you know, I still believe to this day that actually how you consume print is very different to how you consume digital. Should the two cross over? Should you have the same people reading the magazine as they're reading digitally? No, and we've all got over that. I think as editors we used to think, oh, it's the same person. It's completely different people sometimes. But the way that you survive, I think, goes back to what I'm saying. It's not like it's not rocket science, but it's like, first of all, is it quality? But secondly, what digital has done, it means everybody has a voice. But if you look look at it, because people are scared of having a voice now, people start to say the same thing. And so you'll look on Twitter, because if you say something unpopular, or if you don't agree with the tribe, or very tribal, people get humiliated. And of course, humiliation means people go, okay, I'm just going to agree with the crowd. But if you have the balls to actually offer a different point of view, that's how you will stay relevant, because people will go, I'm going to get something from ELLE or whatever that I'm not going to find anywhere else. And if it's also fabulous quality, it's worth paying for, it's worth engaging with.
Thank you.
Would you take a punt on another magazine in the market that's going to go the way of Marie Claire or Glamour even? Do you think there's another magazine out there that's next that sees that digital-only strategy?
You usually hear whispers of who it will be, and there hasn't been. So I don't...
I'm shocked by Marie Claire closing.
Well, I mean, yes and no, I suppose. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's a magazine that I absolutely loved. It was where I always wanted to work. I did end up working there in Australia. Was I surprised? I mean, look, I was really sad. But I suppose the other thing is, it goes back to, are you offering something different? And I think, you know, Marie Claire was a brilliant product, but did it offer something different? I don't know. I mean, you know, if you've only got, remember, because not only are consumers expecting everything for free, but they don't have any time anymore, so they are not going to buy multiple magazines anymore, they're going to buy one. And if you are doing something similar to everyone else, what are you going to go with? Yeah, I didn't see it coming, but I wasn't surprised, and I think a lot of people weren't. But there are no rumours of anybody who is that's going to happen to, and you usually have an idea. The kind of strongest are kind of still there, and are doing pretty well, actually. So no.
It's encouraging. Any other questions from the floor? One here and one over here.
What's the best way to build and maintain contacts in the industry?
Well, to build them, you have to social media. So one of the things when people go, oh, network on social media, it's like, well, what does that mean? If you're a student and you don't have any, you know, nobody knows who you are. And what I always say to people is, okay, you can tell people who are kind of aggressively networking you because, you know, they'll like a couple of your things and then they'll start asking, how do I pitch to ELLE or whatever. The people who are really interesting are those people who... when you post something, they engage with everything you do, but their comments are very thoughtful. So they will go, we had a girl, she didn't follow me, she followed one of my writers at Cosmo, and we were talking about this girl going, you can tell that she's a really genuine, she isn't doing this to everyone, she really believes in Cosmo, and she has a very good understanding of Cosmo. Because the comments that she was leaving were things like, I really enjoyed this piece, but I didn't enjoy it as much as the piece that you'd done 4 issues ago, and here was why. So she gave very insightful commentary. She didn't actually pitch to us in the end. We thought she wanted to be a writer, but she didn't. But she stood out because most people, what happens is they go and network. People say, go and network on social media. And people go, okay, I'm going to do it to, I don't know, Edward Ennifel. And then they drop off. But actually, if you keep going for it and you start to make insightful commentary on pieces, then you do start to get noticed. And then we've had people who have done that, who used to do it on my feeds, and then they come in and do work experience. And then there's a lady, I think she's coming next week. I'll be like, oh, it's Miss Sparkly Eyes, or I don't know what her actual name is. But it was somebody that I knew her name because she always commented, and it was a very smart commentary. And now she's in the office, and now because she's in the office and we know who she is, we're more likely to engage with her. So that's what you have to do.
Saw a few hands.
You mentioned how ELLE and Hearst in general are trying to open up the industry to those who don't have access or the privilege to have a voice within journalism. Do you think that's realistic, considering most content, especially in print, isn't even fully accessible due to high cover prices or not a lot of people having constant access to social media?
Well, remember, all the print magazines are digital as well. And actually, one of the big pushes that we're doing is more longer form on digital now. So that is the beauty for me of digital, is that everybody can get access to it. And actually, I used to have a real thing about not putting anything online that was in print. Now I don't mind about that. Well, I don't do it at the same time, because obviously we have to make money. We are a business, but we'll put it on after it's gone off sale. So I think it is realistic. I think what I don't believe in is people going, I'm going to open the networks and everybody can just have this happy... You've got to work for it, which is why I said to the editors the other day, if you give me a really... I'm saying me because I'm going to be overseeing the project with some people at Hearst. What the editors have to do is give a really strict guideline of what people want. And then if you want it enough, you will pitch. I guarantee what will happen is, because when we were talking about this, someone said, we're going to be inundated by thousands and thousands of pitches. And we did a similar thing at Cosmo once, and you don't, because most people give up. They see all this and they go, I can't be bothered doing that, I just want my idea. And actually, it goes back to what you were saying. Your idea is probably not the right idea. It's going to go through lots of permutations with a good editor. So I think it is realistic. What I think will be interesting is we're going to give opportunity to people, but they've really got to work for it. They've got to show that they are... And that's the world, right? You've got to put your hand up and you've got to really earn it.
Excellent question. Good tip. Thank you, Georgie.
With regards to your having your own voice within your writing, do you think that when you move publications, you need to kind of tweak it a bit, or do you completely stick to what you know?
You might have to tweak it sometimes because... so an example is somebody recently, and she had a really good voice, but actually it was very, very, very... and I kind of wouldn't advise this anyway. It was very colloquial. So this is fab. That's amaze. And I just say that's bad writing, personally. I was like, if your writing is full of that, that's not a voice, that's a shtick, and that's not interesting to read. You might have to, if there's things like that, an editor will almost certainly go, you have the beautiful English language, why would you be using things like amazeballs? Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't mean they haven't got a fabulous voice. This person didn't write amazeballs, but they weren't saying things like it's fab. And it's like, that's just not good journalism. So there are small modifications for sure. So me going, just be yourself, be your voice, you've got to be realistic again. But again, good editors will they'll want you for your voice. But they may edit your voice a little bit. But good editors don't change the voice. They just edit it slightly.
Have you ever had it where you think an editor has kind of, I wouldn't say ruined your writing, but kind of made it so it's not so much you?
Yeah, it happens all the time. I probably do it when I'm editing. Sometimes I go, I always have this thing, they laugh at me at work. I always say to them, this but not this. And they're like, what is she talking about? And so sometimes when I'm editing in a rush, and I'll go, you could do something like this, but not this. So what I'm saying is, put it in your voice. But I think it does happen. And then you have to make a decision, well, if that's what they wanted... Well, you have to ask the question, if that's what they wanted, A, did I not give it to them? Good editors don't change your voice, but what they might do is, if you're giving a sentence and the sentence is full of waffle, an editor might go, this sentence is like a crisp pack in the windy. I mean, what is it? But they shouldn't change your voice. But good editors will push you to change some of your sentences, but not because of the voice, because probably there's no merit in the sentence. Does that make sense? But yeah, I mean, you're nodding, I'm sure a lot of editors do it. So that's the difference. So it's quite unusual what I say. I like people's different voices. But, often a lot of papers will go, well, this is the way it is, like the Mail, this. I have to say they've not really changed my stuff, but they famously do. And they probably will now. But it's quite unusual to go, actually, it's just lots of different voices. And that's where I think some perhaps newspapers and magazines differ slightly. It all depends on the editor, to be completely honest. It comes from the top. And so it would be foolish of me to say you're going to just have your own voice. What I'm saying is the products where I have worked, so Women's Health, Cosmo, and ELLE, we went for different voices, and we went for people with strong voices because they make famous writers eventually. But it's not like that on everywhere.
Have we got time for one more question? Pauline?
Thank you so much for this evening. I've been really, really enjoying it. I'm a magazine-aholic, always have been. I like the idea of originality, and I think about the shop window and the tactility of the print version. How do you bring originality to the cover? I mean, we had the adage, which was, don't put a woman of colour on the cover.
Right.
It will bomb.
Right.
And then Oprah put herself on every cover of her magazine.
So I think for me, and this is my background as... well, actually, there's two things with covers. One is there is a lot in the pose. So the poses are all the same. It's like the knit scratching or the... And that's because you only have a certain amount to work with. But if you can give a surprising cover... So we had Katie Holmes on the cover this month, and she's doing something quite tough and quite aggressive. That is in conflict with who you think Katie Holmes is. So I would say the originality is like, oh, that's quite interesting. For me, it's always come through the lines. It's always been about cover lines. People underestimate cover lines. I think you're right. It is the tactility, and that comes from cover star, pose, colours, the mood. It's really a mood. Does it feel nice? But once you get beyond that and you're reading it, the originality is all in, have you got a brilliant journalist who is coming up with questions which make you go, I don't know the answer to that. I've got to read the piece. Brave cover lines where you go, oh my God. I would say I'm slightly biased because words are my thing, but I think it's the cover lines do it really, and everything else you can kind of tweak a little bit.
Great. Have we got any more questions, or should we finish up now, Emma? Okay, well, just to finish then, I've got a quick fire round for you, just to change the pace a tiny bit. Just a quick answer to Vogue or Vanity Fair?
American or UK?
Okay, American.
Vogue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anna Wintour's Vogue. So Anna Wintour...
But it would have been Graydon Carter's Vanity Fair. So the changes in Vanity Fair, I'm enjoying it a bit more now, but I didn't when it changed. And again, that's the editor taking. It's not quick fire, is it? Sorry, ignore me. Go on. So Vogue, US Vogue.
So then Anna Wintour or Edward Enninful?
Edward, because he's a nice, fun guy. But her because she's interesting, But Edward, I would say.
Piers Morgan or Lorraine Kelly?
Piers Morgan.
Every time.
He's interesting. Do you know what I mean? He pokes the bear. He's interesting. I'm not even sure he believes what he says, but he's an interesting individual.
He definitely pushed, didn't he, on the interview that you had with him?
And that is his job to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.